So I wanted to make a video on, like so many people are today, but just as a sort of response to the Charlie Kirk assassination that occurred yesterday at the time of this recording. I had to collect my thoughts. I've been having a lot of conversations about this over the last, 24 hours or so with various, people in my circles. Um, and I even wrote an email about it this morning. And that email is what I'm going to start off with because it is a pretty, I think, succinct, concise presentation of my position on how everybody should be dealing with this. And not everybody, how people who follow me and people who have some overlap with my approach to things in life, what advice or guidance I would give them, or maybe a little bit more, with a little bit more humility, just what I'm doing, as a counter to the energy that so many people are being pulled by right now. Right. So let me bring that up. And there we go. So I'm going to read this: tragedy, madness, and the real work ahead. This is the email that I had sent this morning. Yesterday, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and as expected, the internet lit up. Half the crowd is demanding to know who pulled the trigger, and the other half, of course, is convinced they already know. And everyone, no matter what side they're on, is boiling over with outrage. And as I'm watching this play out online, here's my problem: outrage doesn't build anything. It doesn't make you stronger. It doesn't feed your family. It certainly doesn't fortify your tribe. Outrage is emotional recruitment, usually the gaslight of the weak, trying to get the strong to act for them. So instead of speculating or ranting, I want to point out something else. Something I talked about with my mastermind group this morning, which is actually true prior to writing this email. I did have one of my mastermind meetings, and the guys and I had I think, a pretty good discussion about this. We have to accept that events like this are no longer random anomalies. They are predictable byproducts of a society that is becoming less functional by the year. And to explain what I mean, let me break down the three forms of mental illness that exist today. And this certainly isn't me sharing some medical opinion or advice. But when people talk about mental illness, I have some opinions on that. And without getting into what that is, let me just share these three forms that I shared in the email. So, number one is biological mental illness. This is the old school version. This is the schizophrenia that develops in the kids' late teens, the brain chemistry that goes haywire, the neurological breakdown that can't be blamed on circumstance. Biology itself fails. The second type is circumstantial mental illness. This is the man who, faced with a devastating situation, snaps. The husband who walks in on his wife with another man and reacts in a way that he would never react under normal circumstances, normal conditions. His stability collapses under a unique and crushing circumstance. I would label that circumstantial mental illness. But now there's a new player: cultural mental illness. This is a new one, the one our society has engineered. Cultural mental illness describes people who can only function inside an artificial environment, which is the aquarium of modern society. They're preserved and enabled by systems that would collapse in the wild. Drop them into the woods with nothing but themselves, and they fail the test of reality. By the way, that is the test that I suggest or I advocate for when determining whether somebody's mentally ill or not. A lot of times what gets classified or categorized as mental illness, and I'm not even saying clinically, but just in general, is what really is just an inability to get along with people in society. But if you were to take somebody with the appropriate level of skills, of course, and put them in the middle of the wilderness and observe them from afar, from a satellite or what have you, at this point, a drone, right? We could pull that off. If they're functioning like any normal person would be, going and building their shelters and getting their food and making sure that they're doing what they need to do to just survive in the situation they're in. If they're doing that, then what exactly would we say is ill with them? Where's the deficiency that they possess if in a natural environment they're able to sustain themselves? And I would say it's not that criteria that most people use when looking at somebody as mentally ill. It's really just an inability to function in society, an inability to sort of meet our standards and expectations. And again, I don't mean to reduce this to some clinical thing. It's beyond that. I just mean the average person in society's functional understanding and usage of this concept of what mentally ill means. So back to the cultural mental illness, which is what I'm presenting as a third option that is new. Think of the boys pumped full of Ritalin because they can't sit still for 8 hours. Think of activists screaming outside of a car dealership, convinced they're warriors for justice. Think of the college kid with blue hair who celebrates a man's death online. Saw a couple of those videos yesterday after the Kirk assassination. None of these identities could sustain themselves without the insulation of technology, surplus, and an artificially padded society. They're products of an environment that rewards dysfunction and protects fragility, and they are multiplying. Here's the consequence. When society manufactures cultural mental illness at scale, it creates people who not only live maladaptively, but who eventually turn destructive to both themselves and to others. Tragedies like Charlie Kirk's assassination are no longer outliers. They are feedback. Which brings me to the part I need to say directly. Stop wasting energy on outrage. Stop pointing fingers as if we'll ever truly know the full story, or as if knowing would actually change anything. What matters is what you are building. Are you becoming stronger as a man? Are you fortifying the people who depend on you? Are you aligning your mission with your tribe so that your work, your body, your alliances, and your values all reinforce each other? Because whether Kirk was killed by a lone lunatic or something more engineered, the answer for us is still the same. Build yourself, build your people, and refuse to be paralyzed or distracted by outrage. That's where I stand. That's what I told my mastermind, and that's what I'll tell you. And today's quote of the day, which I send on every email, if you guys aren't getting my email, you mess it up. When weakness multiplies, it doesn't become strength, it becomes ideology. And I think that's another take on what we're seeing at scale in society at large. So I think, right now there's an opportunity to take the passion, the energy, the emotion that a lot of us are experiencing and leverage that into fuel for transformation. What are the priorities? If you guys have been following me, my 3 roads philosophy is self, tribe, value. What are you doing for you? What are you doing to protect yourself as an individual, to become as powerful as you can as an individual? The next road is, who are you surrounded by? Who are you connecting with? How are you amplifying, multiplying your force, your power by who you select and cultivate to spend your life with? And then finally, what are you doing to acquire resources and value as a result of that? Where do the creative energies get directed toward? Are you looking to create things that you don't necessarily value, but are valued by others? Are you looking to sort of not rock the boat or go along with, whatever pressures you're experiencing at a societal level? Are you still paying attention to strangers on the internet and seeking out their approval? These are things that every individual man needs to sit down and figure out for himself. Charlie Kirk was somebody that I had a significant amount of respect for. He had a good run. He did good work. He was a strong-minded individual. Of course, and it's almost cliche to say this, but of course I didn't agree with everything that he was about. Of course, there was as much offset as potentially there was overlap between my positions of looking at the world and his. He was a devoted Christian, as an example. But there's something to be said for respecting the strength of a man who is willing to live and die by his beliefs. And in that vein, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Charlie Kirk and his legacy. Moving forward, however, for those of us that are still in this game, you got to ask yourself, do you think that you're going to talk your way out of this? Do you think that you are going to morally guilt people into doing what is slowly and surely becoming more of an isolated take on what is moral, on what the right thing is? Oh, this guy should do the right thing. Well, I have news for you. Society is becoming so diverse, so offset, so inconsistent that even the notion of what is right as opposed to wrong is up for debate. It is no longer experienced with the same amount of certainty it once was. Back before, we had different cultures who had different rituals, different identities, different histories, different languages, different religions, different expectations, and of course, a different morality. Those times are gone. So being that that's the case, we need to think of ourselves, and let me say this with a little bit of tact. We need to stop thinking ourselves as people who are defending our community and neighborhood as it's always existed. We need to start thinking of ourselves as a representative of our people who have to negotiate alliances and potentially conflicts with people we'll come into contact with that do not share our values. I don't want to get any more aggressive in my take on where that can go, but I think that's a good share. I do, look at the fact that Charlie Kirk leaves a wife and children, and I think those of us who are on the fence about investing in their own strength, their own capability, or even squaring away their family and an understanding of what you stand for, I would look at that situation and ask yourself right now, I've never met Charlie Kirk nor his family, but does his wife understand what the sacrifice was about? Are his kids going to understand what the sacrifice is about? I'd like to think that they are. Charlie isn't somebody who avoided conflict. He's not somebody that was, showing up for some sporting event. He was in it. He was in the mix, and ultimately paid the ultimate price. We're not going to live forever. Everybody dies. The cliche is not everybody lives. I do think that Charlie Kirk lived his life. I think he has a strong legacy. I think his family has a lot to be proud of. But again, leveraging that lesson for the rest of us, where does that leave you? Where does that leave your family? Where does that leave how things are going to change, become enhanced, modified in some way? However it changes, the one thing I would say, again, don't waste your energy on outrage. And don't sit here expecting that somebody's going to come and make it all right. It's up to us to become as strong as we possibly can, and then find ways to connect with one another in a functional way, in a traditional way, and ultimately in a natural way. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys on the next video.